Welcome back, everybody. It is time for another one of your questions about work. And if you're new, I'm Roy, and I'm here with Min most days. Today's our 129th day of doing this. And we love having guests. And Ernest, I just like having excuses to talk to you, which is honestly part of the whole agenda for getting here. Ernest is an investor with GreatPoint, which invests in health and wellness and enterprise, early stage, generally up through Series B. Min, what are we talking about?
Well, this week we're tackling kind of some of these questions around establishing credibility, managing your reputation. And Ernest, I feel like you have some really great perspectives because we just learned that you started your career as an equity researcher, and then more recently have been in venture for several years now. And so the question we wanted to ask you was, how do I establish my credibility when I may or may not be the expert quite yet?
Yeah, and thanks, Roy and Min, for having me here today. It's always a pleasure. I love speaking to you guys and have an excuse anytime I can too. So it's a mutual feeling. So how do you become an expert when you're not really an expert or maybe not have the confidence? This was a question I had to deal with when looking to go into venture. I had moved out here to San Francisco after business school, which cost, a lot for a at the time I thought very dream job. So I was one of those type A people who wrote about exactly what he wanted to do after business school and was crazy enough and actually got it. It was within nonprofit consulting.
Those kind of people always feel inferior. So I'm happy we're talking about this. Keep going, man.
So it actually happened. And so then I moved out here to San Francisco in the summer of 2013, working for a nonprofit consulting firm. Probably the top nonprofit consulting firm, and love the firm, but I quickly realized that consulting wasn't a great fit for me. I'd worked in equity research, as you mentioned, Min, before starting out in my career, and the problem I even had with that role was it was too far away from actually having skin in the game. Right? You were making recommendations as an equity research analyst, but you didn't put any money in.
Right.
Or when you're a consultant, you're helping people scope out their biggest problems and just giving them a playbook that they may or may not use. So I went back to my summer internship in business school at Kellogg was actually at a venture philanthropy a group called Central Square. And it was in New Delhi, India. I guess I'm burying the lead there. So I was in New Delhi, India for that summer. And so that
you were not an expert in the Indian venture capital market.
I not at all, but sometimes people will take shots on you. But it was focused on education technology in areas that I had tried to start an ed tech company / nonprofit before. And so that role, just going to that role, and I'll get back to the story, that was the one that really put a light bulb in my head that, what I was doing in equity research is very similar to venture capital. It's just a lot earlier, not public information, and you need to be kind of a journalist to figure out all these desperate pieces of information and coming up with a thesis and then acting on it. And so really love that job. So then as I was sitting in my apartment, out of work after having, essentially failing at this dream job, was like, what's next? And I was like, maybe I'll try to venture. And so that's when I was like, okay, can I get into venture? I'm not an expert. And I had a lot of points or just, ways in which I could go, paths I could go. And the initial kind of thought was, okay, go after whatever's hot, become an expert in what's hot. So, this is 2014, 2015. So you're thinking about more, market consumer, or simply just like anything that is horizontal SaaS. And I don't know, I just told you briefly about my background. I don't know anything about those.
How did you do?
And so I got first of all, I was lucky enough to get some early interviews with some, small funds and corporate VCs. And, it's kind of a scene right out of Silicon Valley. A former banker, came in with a suit in Palo Alto offices and was probably instantly taken off like consideration. But through those interviews and networking my butt off, I kind of learned what I needed to gain to become this expert. VC firms are looking for individuals who, one, have a network with entrepreneurs and other investors, and two, have some what they call superpower. It's probably overused as a term, but to double click on that, essentially what they're looking for is, do you have an expertise in a functional area? And so functional is really important because if you, let's say, were number 50 at some, unicorn startup, the thought is you understand how to grow that company, grow a company like that. You understand the experience, you know what to look for, you know what the telltale signs are, and you could probably predict what the next company will be in that area. So that could be engineering, sales, whatever. The other superpower, which is more that was going to be better for me, was, do you have a clear understanding of an industry? And so given I was in equity research covering real estate investment trusts, I, at 22, had spoken to a ton of senior leadership executives, CEOs, chief IR officers, and presented my view on their public company. And so I understood what those companies were doing today and understood where their gaps were. And so I tried to lean in on as a foundation. I was not throwing away my experience like it was trash, but how can I use it? It's still a treasure, right? So I knew real estate, I knew financial services, and I tried to start an ed tech company, right? And so that's where I took my foundation. It was okay, I'm going to know those three areas really well. I have some advantages, and now I need to understand what's happening. If I understand what's happening in the later side, the public side, how can I understand what's happening in the earlier stages that can attack those gaps? And so that's what kind of led me to go in tactical ways in which, okay, how do I build that muscle and that knowledge base that I can be seen as an expert?
Yeah, I mean, I love that insight that, you figured out kind of the language of the overall game, that they were looking for certain things. And then you just went selective in a few areas. There is no such thing in our world as anybody who's an expert in everything. And, repeated discussion of something gives you a sense of the language, which is so much of you were talking about the language, the sartorial language of what you were wearing. And so much of it, I find, is just word choice in one domain versus another. And then you're saying, okay, and then I picked among all these different areas I could have known, I picked a few. And then I made sure that I really know them as well. I love that. At least having some area where you are confident can often, in my experience, be enough, because nobody is confident in every area.
Yeah, and so my story, I was kind of skipping some steps, but essentially did the market research. I quickly also saw one of my feedback points from firms was, you really don't have any high growth experience because your startup, only got to a certain point at the angel stage. So a way to kind of hack that is, I have these three areas, and I identified accelerators that were outside of the Bay Area, right? That were emerging in those verticals. And that way I got to work with those accelerators and kind of glean from what the entrepreneurs were going through to identify, okay, which types of entrepreneurs are doing best in this industry? What are the common problems that they face? What am I really good at, and what do I get passionate about in helping them? And so is it helping with pitch decks? Is it helping them network to get, fundraise? Is it helping with the sales strategy? And so that really helped me too. I worked at Camelback Ventures and ed tech and education accelerator based in New Orleans. And that really started to give me a path. And so then I was starting to get some content, and now I need to actually be comfortable with sharing it. And I think this is where advantage of your previous experience, equity research, my whole job was pontificating and giving out a point of view that could instantly be wrong, right? And so you need to be comfortable with being wrong, and because information changes, you never know.
Sure.
And so that really gave me the confidence of, someone early on gave me advice that you should start blogging, which I was completely against, especially before getting into venture. And then I realized when they told me, you shouldn't think about going viral. Who cares about that? What you should want is to have a repository of a thought resume. And so when people see that, oh, we're going to interview this guy, or we're thinking about bringing him in, he actually cares about like venture. He cares about technology. He has a point of view. I don't agree with his point of view, but at least he has a thought process. And so that's what people want. They want those go-getters that are passionate about it, because a lot of times you might not, even if you get direction, we're all using old information. And this is like very important right now, because no one has invested before, during, or after a pandemic. So the industry is actively changing underneath our feet.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea of a thought resume. And I'm just going to highlight that this was like years in the making for you too. And so this idea of like credibility and establishing expertise doesn't come after just like, 3 or 4 viral tweets. It's like for you years of building relationships and sharing your knowledge and taking feedback from other people who were asking you questions about, oh, I don't know, like, do you know? And then saying, actually, yeah, I did some more work and coming back. And so I feel like this is just the beginning of kind of a longer conversation. So we really appreciate you being here today. And so that was earnest, not advice given.
Yeah, thank you.
It was not advice.
No, real life experience, but I think it was great. All right, to be continued.
To be continued.
Thanks, guys.